right. And with that being said, I am very excited to introduce Professor William Howell. He is the Sidney Stein Professor in American Politics here at the University of Chicago. And he holds appointments in the Harris School, the Political Science Department, and the college. Currently, he is the director of the Center for Effective Government and co-host of the Not Another Politics podcast. Professor Howell has written widely on separation of powers issues in American political institutions, especially the presidency. Currently is working on research projects on separation of powers issues, the origins of political authority, and the normative foundations of executive power. Howell's most recent book with Terry Moe is Presidents, Populism, and the Crisis of Democracy, and his research has appeared in numerous professional journals and edited volumes. And he has also just been named inaugural dean of the New School of Government at Johns Hopkins University. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Professor Howell.
Hey, it's a great pleasure to be here and to be here with all of you. I'll say I've spent the last 19 years. This is my 19th year at the University of Chicago, which is uh, a very special place. Um, I have this opportunity, which I'm about to embark on, to launch a new school that will not exist for a few years. It's really being built up from the ground up. Um, but I'm excited to talk to you about this paper that I've written, which is born of this environment here at the University of Chicago. All of my co-authors are University of Chicago faculty. They are folks in the political science department and at the Harris School of Public Policy, and that both topically, the way we approach the topic, the data that we bring to bear is really born of the commitments and values of this community, which um, this is a very special place. Um, what I thought I would do is um, walk you through the paper, talk to you about some of the ideas that sit behind the paper. I welcome questions and comments as we go. I think the thing to do is to put them into the chat. Is that right, Blake?
That is correct. Yes, I'm just about typing that message.
Okay, great. And then I really hope that this can serve as the basis for us to have a conversation um, about what we do in an environment, um, a political environment that's deeply troubling for lots of reasons. Um, what I want to do is, in many ways, think about the work of the Harris School, to think about the work of public policy schools, which are trying to at once reform and improve our political institutions and also encourage people to get engaged in the civic sector, and to try to think about what the connection is between those two items. So let me pull up, I'm going to share my screen and walk you through some slides. Uh, and and then we're going to, we'll see what we find here. Okay, so do. Okay, let me get up here. Okay, good. Is that coming through for everybody? Can you give me a thought? Okay, I see some nods. Great. Okay, so this is called, the paper is called Opportunities to Govern, How to Increase the Supply of Moderate and Qualified Candidates. And I want to put quotes from the top around what I mean by moderate, what I mean by qualified. I don't want to get too worked up about the issues involving language. And I'm going to be clear, though, about how I measure those concepts shortly. As I mentioned, this is work that with Anthony Fowler, who's a professor in the Harris School of Public Policy, with Andy Eggers, who's over in the political science department, and Molly Offer Westort. And what we're going to try to think about is about concerns about what political scientists call candidate entry. Who's willing to run for public office? Um, and and are we, and I mean, because there's a real concern that right now, when you look up at our politics, that we don't have the right kinds of people occupying positions of power. And what would it mean to get the right kinds of people to run? Um, and the 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 core thing that we're going to explore is that opportunities to govern piece, because when we look up at our politics and we say there's all kinds of screaming and hollering and abject incompetence and extreme polarization, we have an instinct that says, I have an instinct that says, well, let's shut it down because by shutting it down, we can limit the damage that's done. And the big thing that's going to come out of this paper is that that instinct, while not wrong, is really incomplete. And it's incomplete because when you shut it down, when you make it the opportunities to meaningfully govern diminish, it has the effect of reducing the willingness of more qualified and more moderate people to actually run for office. I'm going to present some evidence which shows that. So, um, and most provocatively, let me lead with a provocation. Most provocatively, if what you want to do is to get more moderate and higher qualified people to run for office in an age of extreme polarization and deep concerns about the qualifications of people who run for office, if what you want to do is increase that supply, in some ways you have to take a leap of faith and to invest power and opportunity in the political system so that those people who run for office can actually deliver on their promise. That's that's going to be the provocation that's going to come out of this paper. Okay, so let me see if I can get this thing going here. Doot. There we go. Okay, so two kind of classes of people who one, I think we would always want to run for office, and the other one we might be particularly interested in this present political moment. Democracies, as it says here, as a matter of course, depend upon the willingness of capable and qualified individuals to run for public office. We want people who care, who have skills, who have experience that bears upon their ability to perform the actual jobs that they are running for and to perform them well. We want such people to actually run. That's always and forevermore true. It also, and this is a little bit more um, controversial, but I think in a period of heightened polarization where there are concerns that extremists on the left and extremists on the right don't do the best job of representing the interests of a broader public that hews more towards the center of the political spectrum. And when we have a period of hyperpolarization, as we do now, where there aren't any moderates that might serve a function in government to adjudicate disputes between the left and the right, we might in this moment be interested in trying to find ways to get moderates to actually run. So those are two populations that sort of axiomatically I want to put forward and to say we might want to care about. And what would it do to convince them to run in greater numbers um, for public office? There is a big literature, as it turns out, in political science and also in economics on candidate entry that thinks about the willingness of a whole host of different kinds of people to run for office, and most of them focus on their ascriptive characteristics, that is, their race or their sex or their gender. And they think about, for instance, about the willingness of people to run. There's a big literature, for instance, on women in politics, and that points out that women do not run in as often as they are represented in the broader population, and then tries to think about why that's so. And they point to a whole host of things about how their self-understandings, their early childhood socialization, biases that are built into the electoral process in their efforts to raise money in order to tap into political networks, how all these various things bear upon the willingness of individuals to run for office. And I'll first note from the top that none of those kinds of considerations concern the motivating reason that many, I want to suggest, hold out the possibility that maybe even most individuals actually contemplate running for office, which is the ability to change policy and make a difference in the lives of a community. It's
Professor
about,
Howe?
yeah,
Actually, I think a question just came up that might be leading into this.
yeah.
Alex asked, is the assumption that people start as extreme rather that the political media system rewards populism and therefore people skew less moderate over time?
It's a great question, and I want to underscore why. There's two possibilities here. One is that it's all about selection. The reason why we have heightened levels of polarization today is because extremists on the left and extremists on the right are their extremism is baked in, and they're simply more likely to run for office and therefore occupy office. Alternatively, what's being held out here is a possibility that people start out moderate, but changes in the media market or changes in the party system or changes in the design of the legislative process have pushed them to the extremes. Um, Both could be in play. I want to suggest that most of the action is in the selection story. It's about moderates. The reason why moderates have all but hollowed out in the political system is because moderates aren't running. They're just, and then the question is, why aren't they running? Um, it has less to do with people starting out moderate and becoming extreme over time. That isn't to say that the changes in the media market don't matter for our politics. They clearly do. It's just to say that the dominant force, according to a whole bunch of literature, seems to suggest that selection is the key thing. And so if you what you want to do is recover a vital middle in our politics, what you need to do is convince a bunch of moderates to actually run. Um, so that's what we're going to try to do is try to think about what might do it. And the factor that from the get-go that I want to hold up is that this huge literature that's focusing not just on moderates, but all kinds of people, women in politics, African Americans in politics, why young people or the working class are not running a whole lot. Most of the time, the scholarly literature doesn't pay much attention to this thing, which is people run because they want to use the powers that are vested in an office in order to make a difference in the lives of a constituency.
Actually, and that leads to another great question that just came up.
Yep.
Raj asked, what are your thoughts on the fact that you need a lot of money to run for office? Is this by design? The fact remains that the majority of people elected on either side of the political spectrum seem to be extremely well off. In this way, it seems like the people with political influence that matter are those with a lot of money.
For sure. And I'm going to show you evidence, Raj, that is consistent with those claims. And there's a big literature too that's looking at the role of not just the role of money generally, but the need to raise a lot of money as a disincentive for people to run for public office. And I'm going to show you evidence that we find it in our own survey here that it serves as a big disincentive. But it too is the reason why people don't run is just if we dramatically reduce the amount of money in politics, that doesn't speak, to my mind, to the core reason why people might actually be interested. It pushes away a disincentive, but it doesn't give you, it doesn't, like, if it were suddenly free to run for office, okay, that disincentive is out of the way, but why are you doing it? What's the positive claim? To my mind, I want to postulate here that a primary positive claim for people to run for office is not just about ego rents. It's not just about I love holding power. It's that there's a possibility to actually get something done, to actually do something. And we want to see whether or not that bears upon these folks, moderates and more qualified people. We're going to put quotes around both those things um, in their willingness to seek public office. So two populations, two quantities of interest, moderation and quality, quotes around both. And then second, we want to think about how the institutional features of an elected office might bear upon the people's willingness to actually run for office. Because those institutional features are going to have a big impact on one's ability to actually deliver, to actually, if I win this office, can I get something done? And those institutional features can vary. Sometimes they might impede your ability to get something done, and sometimes they might facilitate your ability to get something done. And we want to see whether or not that bears upon the willingness of moderates and higher quality folk, more competent, more capable, more qualified, these kinds of things, to actually seek public office. So, you know what? Huh. Okay, so here's what we did. Um, we did a survey experiment. Um, of 3,000 registered voters. And these were people who were registered voters who had expressed a kind of baseline awareness of an interest in politics. So this isn't a nationally representative sample. It's selected on those two things. Kind of, do you pay any attention whatsoever to politics? Yes, okay, you're potentially in the pool. Two, are you registered to vote? Yes, okay, now you're in the pool. We've got that's the group that we're going to look at, and what we're going to do is we're going to present to them a series of vignettes. Um, Vignettes where we're going to randomly vary the features of a city council position. That's what we mean by public office. We could have asked people, do you want to run for Senate? Do you want to run for governor? Whatnot. Both of those themes seemed like a bridge too far for the population that we're looking at. So what we're looking at here is just, would you consider running for a city council position? And we're going to describe that position where we randomly vary the fundraising expectations. There you are, Raj, right? Like we're going to tell you, do you have to raise a lot? Do you have to raise a little? We're going to randomly vary their chances of winning, their salary, how often they have to appear in the media. And then we're going to have these three variables at the end that are going to cut to the core of what we think of as features of an office that might bear upon somebody's ability to advance an agenda. And the first is going to be whether or not there's a supermajority requirement to pass laws. So in the city council, do you need to get 2/3 of people to pass? Or can you just do it with a straight majority? Where if it's just a straight majority, it will make it easier to pass laws, all else equal. We're also going to ask how much authority is invested in this position that you're running for, as compared to a city manager position. And the idea here is, well, if all the authority is vested in the city manager, congratulations, you're running for the city council position, and that might do something for you, but it's not going to give you the opportunity to actually accomplish as much of consequence if instead the authority were invested in your own office and not in a city manager position. And then we're also going to vary how many staff members you're going to have at your disposal. And so there's going to be this vignette where all these different these qualities are randomly varied for people who are answering the survey, and it's randomly varied, and um, uh, they're going to then see 8 of these vignettes, and they're going to then express how interested they are, having read it, in running for office. Right? So this is what's called a conjoint experiment, where you're varying a lot of different features of in this case, a political office and an opportunity to run for office. And then we're going to see what that's going to allow us to do is to see how much these different quantities bear upon the answers that people give when on the back end they're asked, how interested on a 1 to 10 scale are you in actually seeking office? Okay. So here's what people actually saw, where they're um, they're being told on a 1 to 10 scale, where 1 interest indicates no interest whatsoever and 10 indicates the highest possible interest. How interested are you running for a city council position? When to run for office, you're going to need to raise 10,000, 20,000. One of those values will be randomly selected to them. So I'm going to give you one scenario is that you will need to raise $20,000 in campaign funds. And your chances of winning are all but guaranteed. Should you win, your annual salary will be $50,000. And typically in a city council, on the city council, you appear in the local news 5 times per month. Okay, so I'm just picking random values that somebody might see in one of these scenarios. Continuing on, to pass the policy on the city council, sponsors of the bill must convince 2/3 of the members to vote for it. And council members will have a staff of 5 assistants, which allows the council member to draft 10 pieces of legislation per year. And there is a city council member who has very substantial powers, so the council ends up making almost all of the important decisions. That's an example of a scenario that might be presented to a respondent. And then they're asked, all right, 1 to 10, where are you at on this one? And they give a value of 2. Then they go back through this 8 times, right? And they're asked, and they're given different values on all these different quantities of interest. which then allows us systematically to assess how each of these factors bear upon the willingness of people to seek public office. Okay? That's the exercise. It's all done online. Um, and with this nationally representative sample, we don't have, we don't actually see them out in the wild. This is just survey based. But it gives us a chance for people in a low context environment to see whether or not these factors, how each of these factors bears upon their expressed interest in seeking office. Okay, let me say a little bit about moderation, a little bit about qualifications, because these are going to be the two populations that are going to be of real interest to us. Um, in order to measure how moderate people are, we ask a whole bevy of questions. We ask their party identification, their self-reported ideology, measures of what political scientists call affective polarization, which is sort of an emotional state about what you feel about people of the opposite party. Like how angry do they make you effectively? We also have questions in here that gauge your support for compromise on the one hand, more moderate, versus sticking with one's principles, less moderate. And then we have a set of open-ended policy questions where we ask people, um, uh, what do you think, for instance, the minimum wage ought to be? And then we look at everybody's responses and we're able to see, who's at the center of the political spectrum on those open-ended policy questions. And what we're going to effectively do is figure out for all these different items, we're going to scale each of those items from from extreme to moderate, and then we're going to take the average of them. Okay, so it's an average. There's a lot going into this, but these are the questions that form that um, underlying construct. And what you're going to see in the data that we got back is sort of interesting, is that the more moderate people are, which is on the x-axis here, the less interested they are in running for public office, which is on the y-axis. So people who are the most extreme in our own data are the ones who are most likely to say, yeah, I'm interested in seeking public office. And so it isn't just in this case that, I mean, here too, we see that moderates are poorly represented in terms of their expressed interest in our data. Okay, so that has to do with moderation. Measuring quality. This one gives me the willies, I'll tell you, because talking about quality people versus lower quality people, I just feel real discomfort with. But we're taking cues from a literature that's pays attention to a bunch of things. And what we're going to do is simply measure a whole lot of things and again take the average of them. We're going to look at their earnings, which you might think about what is their outside earning potential, their employment status, how far they've gotten, whether or not whether or not they're a college graduate. We have a couple of measures of their self-reported attention to politics. Um, we also have 4 measures of their self-reported experience. That is things like, have you ever run a meeting? Have you ever set up a budget? Those kinds of things. We quiz them where we put pictures of national figures and say, can you identify who this person is? And then we have a 3 items that constitute a cognitive reflection test where we actually quiz them on they're like these little logic games. And again, we can see whether or not people got them right or wrong. We're going to take all these measures and score them from high to low and take the average of them. And what I'll say is, if some of these things you have problems with, I'll say from the top, some of these things I have problems with. Um, uh, it really not much hinges upon it. That is, if we drop any one of these items, it doesn't affect at all the results that are going to follow. And these things are all really highly correlated with one another.
Professor Howe?
Yep.
Have another question from Greg asking, how does a willingness to compromise on policy outcomes get reflected in your model's definition of moderate and qualified? Applying game theory concepts, how do expectations of the ability to survive multiple rounds of elections to shape policies stepwise towards some originating ideal influence willingness to continue to be a supplier as an office holder?
Yeah. Oh, what a terrific question. There's sort of two dimensions to this construct that we're calling moderation. One is about ideology and policy and even partisanship. Where do you sit in a distribution? And then the other one is about one's willingness um, to compromise. That is, one willingness to engage in bargaining and negotiating and to settle for something less than what your ideal preference is. I'll say again, in the data, those things actually correlate really highly. It turns out that people who show up as the extremes on ideology and partisanship are less likely to come out and say, yeah, I'm interested in bargaining and negotiating. And one reason for that is that the people who sit at the center of a political spectrum, they might be happy with bargaining and negotiating, not because they have an appetite or a taste for it per se, but because they see when extremists bargain, the policy ultimately ends up roughly with where they sit. Um, in a world in which there's no bargaining and policy just swings from the far left to the far right, that's not great from a moderate's perspective. A moderate as in a centrist um, um, uh, individual. Um, but a world in which the liberals and the conservatives are forced to give a little and negotiate uh, um, when they do negotiate, they often will negotiate to the center, which is precisely where ideological moderates sit. So here again, what I want to say is that in the data, we've broken it out, saying let's just look at this taste-based piece and let's just look at where people sit ideologically. They correlate highly, uh, and so ride with me here. And this ultimate construct is that for the data that I'm going to present to you is just an average of these two different underlying um, constructs. So on competence, quality, how qualified they are, how capable they are, as we've just measured, here we see a positive relationship, just in terms of one's willingness to run. Right? That the people who score highly on that particular construct, as I've just described it, show higher levels, baseline levels of an interest in actually running for office. Okay, so now what we want to do is think about that's at baseline. How do each of those various factors that I just walked you through affect the answers that people give and their professed interest in seeking public office? And so, Raj, here's your first point. Like you said, this money, fundraising is a real disincentive. And the answer is it absolutely is. We see it. It's a big effect. That fundraising, the higher the dollar amount that somebody sees in the context of one of those um, 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 scenarios, the higher that value, the lower the level of interest that they then report out. So that negative sign suggests that the relationship is negative. The higher the value I have to raise, the less interested I am in running, and the stars show that that's a highly statistically significant effect. This is a really big, robust finding. So if you just want to get more people to run, if that's your whole goal, you would do well to go out there and make fundraising less onerous. Um, Winning is another one. That is, if you tell people they've got a good shot at winning, they're much more likely to be willing to step forward. And it's not just a fool's errand. The costs associated with fundraising and you can imagine a whole host of other costs. If it ultimately doesn't lead me to actually securing the office, then why would I enter the race at all? So winning
Actually,
is a big piece.
Professor Howell,
Mhm.
that I missed a question from Tina that actually I think ties right to this, which is
Great.
they note the challenges of all the dark money for selected person to run for office. How much does money play to be in the middle or pragmatic?
Yeah. So I'm going to show you how these are the effects for the population as a whole. And so I'm going to show you data shortly that we're going to be able to see whether or not the effects are different for moderates versus extremists, for people who score high versus score low on that quality index. Right now, the thing to take away from this particular slide is that if all you want to do is increase the size of your candidate pool, not change its composition, just increase the size, you would do well to decrease the fundraising obligations, one. Two, make it more likely that people actually stand a chance of winning. Three, increase the pay in the office, right? When we tell you how much money you're actually going to make, it really bears upon the willingness of people to step forward and run. The media is big. There's a big effect here, which is interesting. People don't like that. They don't want to be in the media. If you tell them uh, you're going to be expected to be on TV a fair bit, that effect is not as large as the last three that we just saw, the magnitude of the effect, but it's a negative and statistically significant effect. That is, it serves as a disincentive for people's willingness to run. We don't see anything, a slight negative effect on this supermajoritarian voting requirement, but I'm going to put a pin on that because we're going to come back to that one. The authority item, the more authority that's vested in the office, the more people are willingness to run for it. And then staff, there's a slight positive effect. The more staff that are going to be at my disposal, the more willingness people are to run. So that's just like if you can then see, like if you wanted to just increase the size of candidate pools, the way to do it is decrease fundraising obligations, increase the chances that they win, increase the pay, decrease the media obligations, and increase the authority vested in an office. And you'll get a larger candidate pool. So these data suggest, right? But this is overall. Remember what we led with, it's not just how do we get more people to run for office, but how do we get more people who are moderate to run for office? And how do we get more high qualified people to run for office? So that's what I'm going to show you next. And let's first look at moderation. And what you see here is the first column is the effect for the most extreme. The second column is the effect for the moderates. And the third column is going to see whether or not there's a difference between those two. And so going back to this point about money being really important, it's been raised twice and for good reason. What you see is that extremists and moderates alike, and the point effects, the point estimates are almost identical to one another, are dissuaded when fundraising expectations increase. And the difference between those effects is effectively zero. That's that third column. So it is the case that if what you did is decrease fundraising obligations to run for public office, you would get more people to run. But in expectation, you wouldn't change its composition because the effect that it has on the extremists is the same as the effect that it has on the moderates. And that's true on all but one of these items. The effect on winning, right? There too, it matters for both, but the point estimates are the same. And so you're not going to change the composition. The same thing with pay and so on, except for authority, right? On authority, you see this big effect for moderates and a null effect for extremists. Moderates care a whole lot about how much authority is invested in this particular office that they're running for, and we don't see any effect for the extremists. And so if what you do is, if what you're interested is in changing the composition and getting more moderates to run for office, you would do well to vest more authority in that office, right? Which is the lead of the title of the paper is again, opportunities to govern. Opportunities to govern are enhanced when I have more power that's available to me. And what this is saying is it's not just that you'll get more moderates to run, it's that the pool of candidates itself will be disproportionately moderate if you allow people who win office to actually wield meaningful authority. When you go over to this measure of competence, the effects are even more stark. Because remember, we had those three measures for opportunities to govern. It was that supermajority item, the authority item, and the staff item. And here we see differential effects all the way across the board, so that people who scored higher on that capability, quality, competence measure, they are they respond negatively to the supermajority, positively to the authority, and positively to the staff. And it's basically the flip for uh, less competent people who score low on that particular item. And so if what you do is say, what we want to do is make it maximally capable for people who win office to actually get stuff done. And the way we're going to allow that to happen is we're going to give them more resources in terms of more staff to support them. We're going to give them more formal authority, and we're going to lower the bar for what it takes to actually pass policy. If you do those three things, these data suggest you will get a pool of candidates that disproportionately is um, uh, scores disproportionately high on this competence scale.
Professor Howell?
Yeah.
I have a question from Stephen, which was, even if you could increase the authority of the role, wouldn't moderates still be subdued by the extremists such that the more authority will not actually occur?
Well, I mean, that's possible. This is why we did the survey is you can imagine when you tell people, when you present these different scenarios, any number of additional thoughts coming on online. And one thought that moderates might say is that, well, shoot, I recognize that if you vest more authority in this office, you probably vest more authority in all the offices. And there are a whole bunch of extremists that might hold those other offices, and I'm going to have to deal with them. And they might get control of, the city council as a whole, and that's bad news. And I don't like it, and therefore I'm going to bow out. It's possible. We That story though isn't consistent with the data that we actually find, which is the more authority you invest, you see this that 0.096, that has a big positive effect for moderates. Moderates say, more authority, now I'm interested, right? Whereas extremists, interestingly, more authority, they're actually less likely. It isn't just that the positive effect isn't as large as it is for, excuse me, not for the moderate. This is now we're in the competent world. I'm getting these data mixed up. The highly competent people are saying, now I'm in play. Um, the people who score low on this particular item uh, um, say, more authority, my God, then I'm less interested, right? The sign actually switches. So, is it possible on authority? Yes, it is possible. Um, but you see here that moderates might have that reaction that was just suggested, but it serves as an incentive for moderates to run in the data, right? That's what we see. So let me just summarize this, and then I'll bring us back together so we're not little tiny boxes. I mean, the design of our political institutions, we find, affects who runs for office, um, and not just overall, but in ways that we ought to care about, we want to suggest in this particular political moment. If what you think, and we think that there are big reasons to believe that moderates are underrepresented in our politics, and we should try to think about ways to get them to run, it turns out that in this age of hyperpolarization at the elite level, if what you want more moderates to run, you would do well to vest more authority in the office, to make the stakes count, to say there's something really in play when we run for in these campaigns. That will draw the moderates out. And what you want to do is get more capable people to run. You should do that, and also in the data, um, you do well to go a step further and to build more capacity into the office, and change the voting rule. That's how you'll get these different populations to run. And it's by, and I'll end with this, and I'll stop sharing. I'll end with the provocation, which is um, precisely when you might be worried most about the state of our politics, you would do well not to tie it up in knots, not to lower the stakes, but actually increase them. Which is why that initial instinct, if you're on the left of the political spectrum and you lived through the Trump years and you celebrated every moment and found comfort in every moment when he was blocked, or if you're on the right of the political spectrum and you rejoice every time that there's something that gets in the way of Biden delivering. These data suggest that I mean, you're conditioning on who's in office, but when you allow for the possibility you could enlist very different kinds of people to run, the thing that you're finding comfort in may actually be the core problem in our politics. So, thoughts, reactions, pushback. Let's hear it.
We have some more questions, definitely. I
Great.
think more will be coming in. First one, Prachi asked, were there any variations seen in the results by socioeconomic or racial background?
Yes, I didn't have these results here. We've broken this out by working class, not working class, by race, and also by sex and gender. What I can tell you is I remember off the top of my head what the results are on sex and gender. Almost none of those factors that we laid out when it comes to those last three items, none of them disproportionately affect women versus men and their willingness to run for office. So it isn't the case that, well, if you increase authority, you may get people who score higher on the competence or score higher on the moderation, but it comes at the cost of having fewer women run for office or something like this. We don't see that in the data. But in the actual paper, and I'm just not remembering off the top of my head what the results are in the appendix, we broke these out in a bunch of different ways that might be of interest to the person who asked the question.
Okay. Alexandra asks, could there be things that affect people's perception of authority that are not related to the job description itself? For example, current perceptions that gridlock has made it impossible to do anything in politics.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all we do is we present these res- these um, vignettes to people in the context of a survey who read them and then have a bunch of thoughts that we don't observe. Um, we elicit from them then their interest in their willingness to run. I'll tell you what my hunch is that's going on is that there are a set of pragmatic centrists who are interested in running if they can get something done. Um, they don't have an ideological axe to grind. They're just they're just thinking, I'd be interested in the job if I can make a difference. And if what you do is you tell me I can't make a difference, then I'm not so interested in running. Um, and it's that simple. I'll say that thought was born of my experience serving on a number of search committees. We did a search, I mean, for the University of Chicago's head librarian, and the the best candidates when they were um, when we reached out to them, the question that they would routinely ask is, "Help me understand the opportunity here." The opportunity to make a difference, to improve the library system at the University of Chicago. That's what they wanted to know. And if you told them, no, this is a placeholder, come to the great University of Chicago and, and rejoice. That's not what they're in for. Like what they want to do is make a difference. And my own sense is that's not that this is a feature of all kinds of labor markets, very much including um, the political labor market. Um, and so when you tell them you will be supported, you will have authority, and the bar for making change isn't so high that it's impossible to get anything done. People who have outside options because they are have higher education and have a lot of experience, um, and um, and people who are more moderate in their political orientation say, "Yeah, all right, you got my attention now."
Gwendolyn asked, knowing fully that this was not the main research purpose, did you happen to use the data to explore the relationship between extremism and moderatism and competence? Was there any correlation there?
I just want to say all these questions are terrific. I've now given this paper at a few uh, at a bunch of universities, and I've heard these questions before because they were asked most recently when I was at Columbia, and this one was a big one. People wanted to know like how different are these things, and we didn't know what we were going to see. Turns out they're almost uncorrelated. there's a slight but very small positive correlation between our measure of moderation and our measure of quality. Um, that's what we observe in the data. We have run these models where if what I want to do is get somebody who scores really high on both the competence quality measure and high on the moderate, the 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 lever that does the most consistent work is that measure of authority. You will get, if you increase the authority in an office, you will get people who score high on both.
This is from Stephen Ann. Don't know who to particularly attribute the question, but the question is, in your sample, what was the distribution with respect to your moderation extreme measures? How does this distribution compare to measures of extremism in the general population?
How does this compare? I don't, okay, so it is true. This is not a nationally representative sample of adults 18 and over. It's a nationally representative sample of people who are registered to vote and who have expressed a baseline level of um, attention to and interest in politics. Um, and the honest answer is I don't know. I don't know. I haven't, I mean, this measure of competence, we sort of packed a whole bunch of stuff in it, and I haven't seen somebody else do precisely what we did and report out what the distribution looks like. It'd be interesting to know how how selective a population we've pulled by adding those two limiting criteria to the sample.
I have another question, which was, can you share your thoughts about the extremists' staff power? How extremism on the left and right can cause these filibusters in Congress, City Hall, other political spectrums?
Can you repeat the first part of the question?
Sure. The thought about the extremists' staff's power, like the power that the extremist staff has.
Oh yeah. So these effects that we're showing are kind of one at a time. Um, um, but what we find when looking at, I just want to pull this up and remind me of myself. The extremists, when they pay attention to the staff, when you give them more staff, they are, hold on a second, give me just a quick second here. Doop, doop. There's a null effect. No, 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 no. Extremists. Yeah, there's a null effect. That is, when you tell extremists that they're going to have a whole lot more staff available to them, they don't, and it's true for the moderates as well. We don't see a clear effect distinguishing people along those lines in terms of their willingness to actually run. Where we do see it is on the measure of quality, wherein we see a big positive effect for the people who score high on quality, and a negative but statistically insignificant effect for the people who score low on that measure.
Nathan has an interesting question, I think. Have you considered administering this battery of questions to a group of individuals who are similarly inspired to take the oath of state or federal office, but outside of politics, such as commissioned officers in the National Guard active duty forces?
For
So they're
sure.
functionally running for office, but competing to be one who takes the oath of office represent a political party.
I think two natural moves to make, having observed these particular results, is to look at different populations and different offices. Like, so I had this in my discussion slide. I run something called the Civic Leadership Academy here in Chicago, um, where we work with people in the nonprofit and the government sector. Um, and I'd love to administer this survey to them. And these are people who are already deeply invested in the civic sector. And you'd say, well, what would it take you now? You know, you run a nonprofit. What would it take to convince you to run for an elected school board? And now that we have Chicago's school board is for the first time in a long time going to be elected. Um, we could then see. So that'd be one move. And the other move is to say it isn't just running for city councils. It could be your willingness to run for a different kind of office or to serve in government in some capacity. Um, my hunch is that these factors we've identified would carry forward. That is, if you, I mean, think about, do a little introspection amongst yourselves, and you say, if somebody were to call and say, we would really like you to serve on this commission in the city government, we'd really like you to do so. And you'll be able to actually get something done. Think about how that might bear upon your willingness to serve, as opposed to, we want you to serve in this position, but it's really going to be, you'll have a title and you'll draw a salary, but the promise isn't that you're going to actually be able to affect meaningful policy change. How would that bear upon your willingness to actually step in and fill the role? My guess is for many people, it would bear significantly on. And so this is not just a story about one population or one particular kind of political office.
Question from Harold. Could it be possible that more extreme people see that the changes in the day-to-day life of a person happen at the local and state level? I think most people would say that these positions have less outright authority than the federal government in their equivalent positions, but can cause greater change in day-to-day life and could be what more extreme people are thinking of when they say that they're closer to indifferent with regards to the amount of authority a position has.
It absolutely could, right? So we're looking at city council positions. Might the effects vary if we're looking at the state level? Maybe. It might be that the extremists are holding out for a particular kind of office somewhere, right? And if you tell me that authority is invested in the state legislature, well, now you've got my attention. But I could care less if it comes to other kinds of office. That's possible. That's a reason to do, again, this survey not once, but 20 or 30 times so that we can vary these kinds of things and to see whether or not the results systematically vary. To our mind, this is the first time somebody has looked at these particular kinds of populations and looked squarely at these concerns about what we're calling opportunities to govern.
Mary asks, in America, how would you imagine term limits might affect this study? Since so many legislators overstay their welcome, if you will, but they also deter other moderate qualified candidates from running because they are so entrenched.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, there there's a lot of work in political science on the effects of term limits. Much of that empirical work shows that in the final year of somebody's time in office, when they're being term limited, their effort drops off significantly. And Mary's pointing towards what can happen at the front end, which is if I know I can only serve 2 terms, all else equal, I might be less willing to actually throw my hat in the ring. And that not that consideration might bear disproportionately heavily on the thinking of precisely the kinds of people who we really want running for office. You've got your one shot, you could serve for 2 years and then you got to move on. If that's what you're being told, a set of people we really want to have run for office might say, it's not worth my time. I recognize that accomplishing anything of significance is going to take 5 to 6 years. And so um, you then, at the front end, as I said, maybe distorting um, the candidate pool in ways that we would find normatively troubling.
Kind of interesting two-part question that was almost a conversation between folks. First question was, do you think that your findings are very specific to the US political system context or applicable to similar democratic structure context? And that was followed up by Alex noting, I'm from Australia and I wonder how this applies here, particularly compulsory voting, which impacts how certain voting is and much stricter rules around financing.
Yeah, so Alex, I want you to take this survey and I want you to find a local survey outlet in Australia and then report back to us what you actually find. It would be interesting to know how these sets of normative considerations bear upon entirely different populations and their willingness to like this opportunities to govern. It may be a unique feature of U.S. politics. Maybe not. Right? I suspect not. I suspect there are folks in Australia who are like, I would consider this if I can get something done. Right? And if you tell me I can't get anything done, then I'm going to move on and I'm going to look at these outside options, which are really attractive to me. Um, a thing that I will say is that one's ability to get something done varies dramatically across the US political system. Um, and a city council is not a city council is not a city council here in the US. There are some places where being on that council allows you to really meaningfully affect goings on within your metropolitan region, and other reasons and other places where that's not true. And all else equal, what these data suggest is that in those places where um, uh, more power is invested in authority, more capacity is available to people who run the office, and the bar to passing legislation isn't too high, you're going to get a more moderate and a more highly qualified set of people who are actually going to run for those positions.
We're closing in, but on the end of our time here. But again, I want to be mindful of all of everybody who's attending. I want to be mindful of Professor Howells. If people are able to stick around, Professor Howell, if you are able to, I want to be again respectful of everybody's time. I will, to that end, look at a couple other questions I think could be potentially good dovetails for not dovetails, but ending points for folks who do have to leave.
Right.
So Gwendolyn had asked, what, if any, new or follow-up questions are you interested in researching after analyzing these findings?
Yeah, I think I've hit it. I've touched on some of these. One is, again, varying the office, varying different populations. That's one, a natural sort of extension of this sort of work. There's this other piece which I'd love to put more thought to, which is, to my mind, the trade-off, if you're troubled by our politics, is one, if you don't like who's in office, how do you constrain them against, on the one hand? So think about a demagogue. All else equal, what we want to do is limit the damage that a demagogue can wield if he secures power on the one hand. On the other hand, we want to reduce the probability that such a person is actually going to win office. And we want to increase the probability that people who uh, are more committed to public service are to more likely that they're actually going to run. And this strikes me as, I mean, the findings in the paper here suggest there's a real tension between those two things. And in some ways, you've got to choose. One, you can't um, say what we want is a system that will only allow people to get things done if they're highly competent, right? That's not on offer in a democracy. It's just you got to make the decision how much power is going to be vested in office. And it turns out that, well, you're going to get more highly qualified people to run if more power is invested in that office on the one hand. But the danger is that it could be by chance. Somebody who is not highly qualified could nonetheless win and then wield that power for purposes that are normatively objectionable, right? And so what are you to do? That's a sort of a core democratic dilemma.
Speaking of that in a way, Stephen asked if there are many institutions that are likely and soon to use the results of the survey, or is it still in a theoretical status only as of now?
So, is it just theory? So I run something called the Center for Effective Government and think a lot about how do we design institutions um, that will allow elected people to meaningfully bargain and negotiate and get things done that are consistent with public preferences. And I'll say a way that this survey informs the work that we're doing in that context is to say to people who look up at our politics and say, just shut it all down, because they're just a bunch of incompetent, crazy extremists who are wielding power. And what the survey says is that, well, if you shut it all down, you're exacerbating the very problem that's that stands at the center of your thinking. And and which is why the work of effective government isn't just about matters of institutional design. It also bears upon the willingness of other people to run for public office, which then shapes our mass politics. So, like, to my mind, there are some actionable talking points that come from this that bear upon live debates about what it means to sustain a democracy that are playing out now.
I want to let folks know because again, we will make a copy of this available. So I just put a mess of links in the chat so that people have access to the movie. I know it's I saw Raj, I saw your eyes go there. Yes, it's a lot of stuff, but I want to make sure folks had it and will be able to see it when they review this later. I want to close, have a final question here, just again to be mindful. And again, super appreciate your time here, Professor Howell, talking to everybody. And I appreciate everybody showing up and learning from the kind of research that is done here at the University of Chicago at the Harris School of Public Policy. So I'm going to have the final question. Stanley asked, would the willingness to compromise lead to a lower expectation for moderate candidates about what they can achieve in office, which might decrease their incentive to run?
Um, yes, we saw in the data, right, that moderates at baseline are less interested in running for office than are extremists. Why might that be? Well, this is one possibility. They think that they'll just be on the losing end of the political spectrum. I'll say you might also think that, well, extremists, all else equal, they too are vulnerable insofar as their ability to advance their agenda is imperiled, particularly when the opposition party is in power. They can't hope to get anything that approximates what they actually would want when um, when the opposition party wields power. So um, so there's that. I guess my instinct is that in a world shaped by gridlock and policy volatility, um, pragmatically oriented would-be candidates think my energy and my talents are best devoted and spent elsewhere. Because why would I want to be a part of that hornet's nest when I can instead do this other thing? And so if we can get into the business of taming our politics, and make it possible for them to actually advance change, um, these data suggest we'll do a better job of drawing them in. Listen, these were terrific questions. And again, this paper wouldn't exist without not just my colleagues in a general way, but because of the kind of intellectual environment that's here. You could see it's speaking to a bunch of literatures on Canada entry, but a bunch of also pragmatic considerations about the challenges that democracies face and what would it mean to change the kinds of people who are willing to serve in the public. So thank you all for signing on and staying with me for the last 66 minutes.
Is there actually, I just realized, is there a way folks can get this paper?
It's so funny. I submitted to a journal 10 minutes before we signed on. I hit send, but I will put it up on my website, the draft of it, and so that interested people can get it.
And we'll include that in the communications when folks, if they ask to request to see this session. So again,
Terrific.
thank you again so much, Professor Howell. Thank you everybody for joining us. And we hope to see you at another event soon. Thank you so much.